The Audio Train programme is supported by the following businesses: Tysers, a leading media insurance company; Garment Printing, supplier of printed clothing and branded merchandise; Prager Metis, an international advisory and accounting firm; AV Resilience, a supplier of technical consultancy and broadcast equipment; Mint & Co, a dynamic legal and business affairs company; and NoteTracks, a platform for audio producers, engineers and collaborators to take notes, get feedback and share projects. Audio Train is part of Audio UK, the trade association for professional audio production companies.
Hello, welcome to the Audio Train workshops and webinars. We took a break over the summer, but we're back now with a great session about presenting skills. And who better to share their expertise with us than Smooth Radio's Angie Greaves. She's been in the business for over 30 years, working across commercial and public service radio stations. Angie will be talking to Rosemary Laryea. Rosemary has worked in speech and music radio and is currently a senior producer with Times Radio. I'm going to leave Rosemary to do further introductions, but we really want to hear from you. So if you've got questions, then please use the Q&A, which is at the bottom of the screen, and we'll be coming to those in roughly half an hour. So, hello, Angie and Rosemary.
Hello, Caroline, and thank you so much. So, welcome everybody to Presenting Skills to Make the Best of Your Voice. I'm Rosemary Laryea, as Caroline said, and I want to introduce you to this very colourful guest that we have here. So, from secretary in the HR department to now having the most distinctive female voice in UK radio today, I need to say hello and welcome Angie Greaves, and thank you for giving up a little bit of your time for Audio Train. How are you?
I'm really, really well. It's my absolute pleasure, Rosemary. How could I turn down this opportunity?
You look lovely, I must say. Absolutely lovely. So let's kick off with the questions, Angie. So now I know some of us, or some people might know about DJ Kid Jensen actually finding you and recognising that you had potential to be a radio presenter. But it was actually your brother, wasn't it, who got you your first gig on the radio? Tell us about that.
Yeah, okay. So my eldest brother, who lives in Barbados, when he was getting married in 1996, he spoke to a radio station in Barbados called Liberty. The guy's name was Admiral Nelson, and he said, my sister works at Capital Radio in London. Didn't tell Admiral Nelson that I worked in HR and had gone over to production. So they were under the impression that I had this show. So I thought, well, do you know what? If you're going to mess up, this is the place to do it. Mess up in Barbados and just jump in the sea afterwards. So that's where it all started. Crazy times. Yeah, that's.
And how long was the gig?
Well, I went to Barbados for my brother's wedding, and I went for 3 weeks, and I was given 2 weekends of shows, Saturday and Sunday, and I think they were like 4-hour shows. So I just thought, you know what, just go for it. And I took like a duck to water, and it was just absolutely awesome. Absolutely awesome. Loved it.
So prior to that, had you any training in radio at all, or maybe since that little, dive into the deep end, then did you get crazily involved in radio training?
Well, whilst I was in HR at Capital, and I'm talking about the days when Capital Radio was at Euston Tower, you might recall that building, they called it the Hot Rocking Tower, with the stairway that went, it kind of curled up and went to the first floor of Capital. So I was in HR there, but I also used to do some voiceovers for any radio presenters that asked me to do them, whether it was in an American accent, whether it was in a straight, nighttime, very, very smooth accent, whether it was a hard hitting, voiceover. So I that was my introduction to the studio. And that might have just been in my lunch hour. Somebody might have said, Angie, I was literally given a piece of paper. Can you record this? No problem. And I'd go and record it. And then I'd go back to my word processor. Do you remember word processors? I know. But I never, ever thought that it was the beginning of something. I was just really enjoying being at Capital. Bearing in mind, my mum said to me, go and find a job. Go and find a job and get some money behind you and train to be a doctor or a dentist or a nurse or a lawyer. Some kind of trade that people are always going to need. So I only went to Capital for about 6 months to a year. That was the plan. But there was another plan. Because 2 years later, I thought, hang on a minute, you're still here. You're meant to be training as a doctor or a lawyer or a nurse or a dentist. But I just took to the studio like a duck to water, absolutely.
Yeah. And then you got like a bit of a radio bug then, did you?
Bug is the operative word. I became addicted.
Yeah. So when you realised that is what you wanted to do, how did you go about it? Did you decide that you wanted or needed some training, or did you just think, well, I'm going to learn because I'm in Capital already, full of DJs and presenters, they'll just show me the ropes. How did you go about doing it?
I had the best training possible. I used to go into any of the spare studios in my lunch hour and especially after work. And I used to put little shows together, whether it was gospel or reggae or soul or pop. I just used to put these shows together. And I used to give David Jensen a cassette. And he used to listen on and say, I know. So I really owe a lot of my success because of David Jensen, Jeff Graham, Lynn Parsons. These people would listen to these cassettes that I would put together on their way home and would give me constructive criticism as well. And when I realised that there was an actual route that you had to take, then I knew that I had to leave Capital. I loved producing. I absolutely adored being in the studio. So I would be on 2 shifts. So in the mornings I would produce John Sachs, and then at lunchtimes I would produce Mick Brown. That would be 1 shift, and then the next week or the next month maybe I'd be on the afternoon shift. So I would then produce Richard Allenson and then David Jensen, who was on Drive. So it's really interesting that I now do a Drive show. But I take that level of training to heart because I didn't do a course. I didn't enroll in a media college. I was an HR assistant, moved into production, and then utilised the studios of the radio station that I was at. And at that time, I was working with Chris Tarrant, John Sachs, Pat Sharp, Mick Brown, David Jensen, Lynn Parsons, Jackie Brambles, names who were the pinnacle of radio in the 80s. And you can't learn that through a course.
No.
Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. Yeah. It does. Now, some people might not realise that you were in production. So do you want to just share how you got into production first?
Okay, so when I got back from Barbados and I knew that I had the bug for radio, I actually went to the boss at the time and I resigned, and he said, well, where are you going? What are you going to do? And I said, well, I don't know. And he was like, well, how can you be resigning and you don't know where you're going? And I just said, look, I love being in radio, but I'm not sure that HR is for me. I think I've done my time in HR. And I was taken up to a room that was floor to ceiling, wall to wall, 12-inch reels. Now, certain people watching this may not remember the Reeboks, which was just a massive cassette recorder. I can hear you laughing, Rosemary, it's fine. It was just a massive cassette recorder. The reels were 12 inches, and I used to listen to these reels. And I used to just band up these interviews. So I'd sit there listening to Paul McCartney talking about the Beatles, Smokey Robinson talking about early days at Motown. You know, names upon names upon names. Eric Clapton. I mean, I'd be like, wow, this is just priceless audio. Bob Marley talking to David Rodigan. It was just priceless. And I would band up these reels, and I was quite happy to do that. And I'd computerize these reels as well. Now, at the time, computers were big, chunky things.
Mainframes.
But, you know, I think that's when I realised I was wired for sound as well.
Yeah, yeah.
And there was a group called Mel and Kim, the Appleby sisters, and one of them became very ill and unfortunately passed away. And at the time, the programme controller, he just came to me, Richard Park, he just came to me and he said, one of the Appleby sisters has passed away, what have you got? So I then went to my computer and I typed in Appleby. And on the screen came all of these interviews. So Reel 54, Band 3, Reel 75, Band 4, Reel 121, Band 1. I had all of this audio, which I then took down to the newsroom for a programme at the time that was called The Way It Is. It was presented by Matthew Bannister and a guy called Nick Wheeler. And I just gave them these reels, didn't think anything of it, Rosemary. Went home, turned on the radio, and there was a tribute programme going out to the Appleby sisters. And I went, Ange, you provided that audio. You provided those reels. Didn't think anything of it. Went into work the next day and I was told, you need to go and produce. And I was like, okay. Now, I couldn't say how or I can't. And this is one thing that I always say to students, never say you can't. Find out a way to do it.
Yeah.
But never say you can't, because straight away you're giving away the fact that the passion isn't really there.
Yeah.
So never say I can't, find a way to do it.
Yeah. So with your eager ear for sound, yes, and obviously your natural passion for radio, you spoke about the different presenters who were listening to your cassettes in those days and giving you feedback. So what skills did you learn that you had to have to be a radio presenter? And since then, what other skills have you learned that have built on that?
Okay, well, reading is a must. Advertising, especially in commercial radio, you might be asked to read a live read. A client may say, well, listen, instead of taking out airtime, I actually want the presenter to read this. So reading is a must. Passion is a must. Communicative skills is a must. And I always say as well, don't try to sound like anybody else. Be yourself. And that is so, so important, because you might think, well, I don't sound like him or her and they're so good, but they have a USP, they have a unique selling point. You need to find your own unique selling point, because that could be what an advertiser, especially in commercials, that could be what they home in on. So don't feel that you're not good enough, or you don't sound like somebody, or you don't enthuse like someone else. It's so important to be yourself. It's so, so, so important.
Did you realise that straight away? Because I mean, when you started and you're doing your little tapes and everything, did you realise that you needed to be just Angie as opposed to somebody else?
Not at all. I thought I needed to sound like.
Yeah.
I needed to speak like. I need to communicate like. But could you imagine if everybody sounded the same on radio? It wouldn't have the colourfulness, it wouldn't have the peaks, the troughs, it wouldn't, passion on one level, it just wouldn't come through. So there's a reason why somebody might say, I like listening to, it could be their accent, it could be the way they talk about an artist, it could be the fact that they talk about their lives, it could be the fact that they talk about their kids, it could be the fact that they talk about their partners, it could be the fact that they talk about their clothing. It might be one little thing that just stands out, that makes you say, oh my God, what's the time? I must listen to, because I love the way he or she talks about. And then the music kind of adds to that. So a perfect example is the show that I do on Smooth. I love doing Drive because I think about people having had a hard day on the way home from work, maybe on the way to do after school clubs, maybe on the way out, maybe they work shifts. So I always think about what people are doing. But what I also like about the Sunday morning vibe on Smooth, and I say this every week, it's a blank canvas. It's whatever you do with your Sunday, I'll provide the music.
Nice.
So you find that people then connect with you because they could be decluttering, cooking, cleaning, having a lie-in, getting over a hangover. But because I've given them permission, so to speak, to just be themselves, and I'll be myself, and I'll provide the music, it's a win-win.
Nice. So I know Caroline didn't obviously mention earlier on that you have had more than 30 years in the industry.
Yeah.
So what would you say? You're going, yes, you can't believe it, can you? Seemed like yesterday, didn't it?
Because it's really interesting that I can pinpoint certain experiences as if they were yesterday.
Fabulous.
I didn't realise how long I'd been at my previous station until I calculated the ages of my girls. It just didn't click.
Yeah.
Because also, my eldest daughter was 6 when I joined my previous station. My youngest daughter was 2. And I was at that station for 14 years. So my eldest daughter was 20 when I left.
Right.
And my youngest daughter was 17. And I was like, no, this can't be happening. Because you really do just get onto this road where, I call it where the rubber meets the road, and you're just enjoying yourself. I didn't click that it had been that long. So sometimes when I do stop and think, I'm like, wow, has it really been that long? I mean, today, 2nd of September, it's 2 years since I've been at Smooth. Where did the time go?
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Wonderful. And it obviously shows that you're having a good time as well, as the time
Absolutely.
is actually flying.
Oh my God, yes.
Yeah. So the question for me now is really, what is the secret of your success, Angie? 30 years on, people still recognise your voice. You're still very much in demand. You're doing voiceovers, which we'll come on to in a minute. But what do you feel the secret of your success is?
Rosemary, if I knew what it was, things would probably wrap up. And let me explain what I mean. I don't think you ever reach that point where you've made it. It's about a constant learning all the time. It's about constantly going along a road and doors just opening. And I think it's about being receptive to that. It's about being receptive to change. It's about being receptive to the fact that you're in an industry, which is great, but it's kind of like a service, if that makes sense. And I found that very much during lockdown. Oh my God, I can remember when I first started working from home, it wasn't just about the fact that I was working from home. It was about the fact that people's lives had changed and they were relying on me to get them through the evening. It was about the fact that people were working from home, which was probably alien to them. Children working from home, partners working from home, And I think that's where the service of radio for me took on another level. Something just kicked in. And I know your question was, what is the secret of success? But Rosemary, I'm going to be really upfront with you. I can't answer that. I just do it, and I love it.
Yeah.
And for me, every day is another opportunity to do something I really, really love. I find it really difficult to listen to people who say, I don't like my job. I can't ever say that. I can't ever say that.
Yeah. And that really helps. That helps the success, I think.
Yeah.
I just want to remind the viewers to please put in your questions, any questions that you want to ask Angie. We'll take your questions at the end of this particular interview. So, Angie, I know you said earlier on that you haven't had formal training, but what advice would you give those, folk who are listening, who are watching, who actually want to be radio presenters? Do you think they should have some type of formal training? There are so many courses out there.
Well, I'm all for courses. I think that it's a time where you don't even have to physically go somewhere to do a course. You can do courses online, and I say do those courses, learn as much as you can. Don't just learn the audible part of radio. Learn about the technical skills, learn about engineering, learn about sponsorship, learn about marketing, learn about all the facets that are involved that make a radio program what it is. Learn about everything that is involved that then becomes the audible part of the program, so to speak, that when that presenter speaks through that mic, learn about everything that makes that up. But I will say, once you have completed your course, find a job, find a way to get into a radio station, because you might find that writing down what your course director has told you to do takes on a completely different meaning when you get into a radio station and you put that into practice. So there's nothing better about doing it than doing it.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
And it does make sense, but I'm also thinking, for some people, they might think, well, how can I find a job? Because it's a tough industry, as you know, Angie. Should they try to do hospital radio, community radio? How do they get a foot in the door?
Well, as you say, there's hospital radio, there is community radio, there's even store radio. Superdrug has a radio station, Topshop has a radio station. There's so many opportunities to do radio. There's opportunities now to do your own podcast. You might decide, right, I'm going to have a conversation looking into a camera, speaking myself, but when I put it out there onto the internet, it's about who it aligns with, who it captures, who it resonates with. There's so many opportunities. And I think once you know what kind of radio you want to do, whether that be speech, whether that be music, whether that be in front of the mic, behind the mic, production, engineering, marketing, whatever it is you want to do, then you can go on to, I think it's media, it was called mediauk.com. I think it's now called media.info. And you can find out which radio stations have vacancies and just email people, and networking as well. I think that's really, really important. A lot of the time, you might find that you send out emails continuously. And I think, the internet's given us the opportunity to connect with people, to connect with decision makers. But you'd be surprised when you go to an event, you meet somebody face to face, it takes on a completely different meaning. It takes on a completely different energy. There's an opportunity there to talk to somebody. Now, you might not get what you want at that meeting. You might not get what you want at that time. But something may happen and that person might remember you. I met him at, I met her at. Networking is so, so important. And there's loads of networking groups now where you can join them.
Yeah. So did you do a lot of networking and knock on a lot of doors as well so that you can get your foot in the door? Was it as tough for you as it would be for everybody else? Yeah.
I did not. I actually networked once I was in the industry. So because I was at Capital Radio, because I was using the studios, and then being on the inside, I was able to see what was happening in the industry. So when I heard about the incremental stations that were coming up, I thought, right, let me go for Spectrum, because it was a multicultural station. It was Greek, it was African Caribbean, it was Spanish, it was Italian, it was, it was right across the board. So I went for the African Caribbean show and got that. That was really, really interesting. That didn't last long. And I thought, all right, let me forget it, because it's obviously not for me. Went back into temping, and then an opportunity came up to do one show a week on Choice FM, midnight till 2 on Friday. And I just thought, well, I'll carry on temping and I'll do the show. And it was good. Yeah.
Fabulous, fabulous. And you mentioned music and speech radio, which of course you've done both. If you could just tell our viewers what the difference is in the radio presentation for, between music and speech.
Yeah. I love music radio. I love the fact that music brings back memories, songs bring back memories, songs paint pictures of a time when, songs give you a feeling of the time that you met and you tasted and you raved and you wore a certain outfit, and songs do really connect to memories, and I love being able to present that. It's kind of like theatre of the mind. When I had the opportunity to work on LBC, I just, it was really, really interesting. One thing I will say about speech radio is you have to know your stuff.
Yeah.
You can't be at the helm of a program about a subject that people are going to talk about and you not know your stuff. Equally, you have to be very, very open if you don't know your stuff and just say, okay, can you educate me about that? That then could open up another channel for conversation as well. I absolutely loved working on LBC. I I freelanced there for about 2.5 years. But I will say this, you can't have much to drink before you do a speech show because there's no chance to go to the bathroom.
That's for sure.
I played 3 songs in a row on Smooth. So if I need to use the bathroom, I can go and use the bathroom. Speech radio, you've got to have a long ad break or just don't drink anything a good hour before you start your show. It's true.
And also, I mean, there's a different technique needed, isn't there, in music radio, because you only have 30 seconds to actually, deliver your link, which is supposed to be interesting and engaging. But of course, with speech, you're normally speaking to somebody for a 6-minute slot. So you have more of a liberty to relax and get into a conversation. I remember when I was at Jazz FM, someone said, music radio stations harder because where are you going to find 30 seconds to really educate and inform somebody? Speech radio, they said, it's a lot easier because you've got more time to actually, talk about your message. What do you say to that?
It's called word economy. And I must be very honest, there are some days I'm very, very naughty. And I can talk a little bit longer. Well, because sometimes, so for instance, Smooth's just had the chart we call Smooth Icons. And it's very difficult to talk about Elton John in 30 seconds. The man's had a catalogue that's rolled on for decades and decades. Whitney Houston. I can't wrap up a link about Whitney Houston in 30 seconds. George Michael. Can't wrap up a link about George Michael in 30 seconds. And then Smooth Icon, the number one, the icon that people voted last year and this year was Michael Jackson. I can't talk about Michael Jackson, but do you know what I mean? So I am probably a little bit, I'm not going to say naughty, I'm going to say passionate.
We'll say that. Passionate is a good word.
I think that I think that the listeners respect that.
Yeah.
And I think that comes through on social media, which is something that I go through phases with social media. Sometimes I'm 50-50. Sometimes I'm really into it. Other times I need a break. But I think you get to see a lot of the fruits of your labour through Radar, which fingers crossed is coming back very soon. We've been doing a lot of Radar type figure analysis.
And you've done really well, haven't you?
Listening, we do that through our digital listening, and I also do like to see what's happening on social media, on the understanding that you might see something you don't want to see.
You mentioned voiceovers earlier on about, doing some stuff when you were in Capital, but I know you obviously do voiceovers now. So again, for the folks who are watching and they might have an interest in voiceovers, how will they get into voiceovers and what skills are required to be a voiceover artist?
So once again, I'm going to say I was very blessed, very lucky. I was pregnant with my first daughter, so we're talking 23 years ago now. And I was asked to read for a documentary the 3 trimesters of pregnancy. And I was in my 3rd trimester, and the voiceover person that asked me to read this for a documentary said, this is really good, this is very, very passionate. And I said, well, I'm pregnant. So that went down really well, and she put me on her books. Her name's Jennifer Taylor. She runs Shining Voices with a lady called Claire Daintree, and I've been with those guys 23 years. You have peaks and troughs. Some days the phone doesn't stop. Angie, can you read this? When you get to work, can you do this? Other times you might not hear anything for ages. The last 2 voiceovers that I've really enjoyed, one was for kind of like a chemical brand, and the other, fingers crossed, that's coming out this month, was for Kindergarten Superhero, which was the last project that Stan leaded with Arnold Schwarzenegger. So it was an animation. So I'm going to be in this animation with Arnold Schwarzenegger as a thief.
Oh, how cool is that?
How cool is that? And he's going to, I'm the baddie, so he's going to arrest me and he's going to lock me up. So, it's just such fun. Rosemary,
it sounds fun. It sounds fun.
Yeah.
But then I'm also thinking, like you said, you were blessed to, fall into voiceovers as well. But what do most folks have to do in order to do voice work? Would it be a case of going to the recording studio? Sorry, go on.
Well, I would say if you're good at accents, put a reel together that displays the accents that you can do. Now, it might be that you just do a straight read. That might be perfect for documentaries. The reason that I would say put accents on as well is because the animation world is so opening up at the moment. My first animation job, I was a concrete mixer for children's ITV. It was a program like Bob the Builder, and I was a concrete mixer. And I used to mix up the concrete and mix it up. And, I just had the time of my life. And then what would happen is maybe somebody had a sore throat and so, they couldn't do their bit that week. And so I would then take over and I would do another little character. It's just, it's just really great. So if you are able to do accents, and especially if you've got a voice that perhaps, or if you're in a position whereby, I think I've got quite a mature voice. So I'm more in your 40s, 50s bracket in terms of voiceovers. But sometimes if I'm asked to do something for a children's programme, and if I need to do like a voice that's a little bit younger, then, there's the ability to really do that as well. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. But that's the character that I'm doing with Arnold Schwarzenegger. He's a very, very dirty character. And she gets arrested. And so if you're able to do accents, then I would say do accents. And, put light and shade in your voice, because, like I say, the world of animation is really, really opening up. And it's just such fun as well, really.
So get a reel together and maybe use the internet to look at voiceover agencies and then send it along, yes?
Yeah, absolutely. And don't make your reel too long. So I would say this is just my advice, and this is what I did when I was first. And like I said, we're going back 23 years. So I did 30 seconds of different accents. So I might do, let's say 45 seconds, so 15 seconds of, say, 3 accents. And then I did a 90-second straight read. And that was for the documentary about pregnancy and different trimesters. So show light and shade in your voice, show accents that you can do. Maybe you've got a really happy voice that you can put on. And, when I did the Sunny Delight advert, oh my God, it's all coming back to me now. I did the Sunny Delight advert, and when Snacker Jacks first came out, I did the Snacker Jacks advert. Snacker Jacks. Some things are too good to keep to yourself. And so that was more of a happy accent. But then when I read about the 3 trimesters of pregnancy and how your ankles might swell and your breasts might be a bit sore, and so do the different light and shade in your voices, do the different accents, put on a happy accent, put on a nice light accent, maybe you want to do a little children's thing, and send those reels out. Google the different voice agencies and just send those reels out, and it's so much easier now. You just send your link, you send your biog, you send your photo, get that dropping into people's inboxes. It just might happen that one day a job goes into a voice agency, and maybe they don't have anybody on their books, and then your reel drops in and you are exactly what they're looking for. Yeah. Don't give up. Just keep doing it, keep doing it, keep doing it.
Yeah. And what advice, Angie, would you give somebody who wants to use their voice, but they're not sure whether or not they might want to do radio presentation, voiceover artistry, or even maybe want to do a podcast? What advice would you give them? How would they know, or how should they go about, finding where their voice might fit?
It's a feeling and it's a passion. You might find that perhaps, I can remember when my girls were both in nursery and just narrating the nativity play at my daughter's nursery. That might just be a way to get started. You might decide, you're passionate about something in terms of voiceovers. So, for instance, both my daughters are now out of education, and I think I've got something called pre-ENS, pre-emptiness syndrome. So I've done a write-up about it on my website, and someone's actually said to me, listen, this could be a good podcast. Now, because I'm passionate about that, you can hear that in my voice. Now, you might not hear the same person on Smooth talking about music. This is where you'll hear the mother. So there are, we all wear different hats, don't we? So you might wear your parenting hat, you might wear your professional hat, you might wear your passionate hat. We all have different, you might wear your hobby hat. Maybe you like working out and you talk about working out. So when you go to the gym and you talk about the exercises that you do, that might take on a completely different pattern to what your job is. So I would say find that passion and just talk. And talk to yourself. One of the things that I was always taught when I first wanted to get into presenting, and at the time I had a cassette player with a microphone. You can do it with your phone now, yeah? You just walk around the house describing what's going on in your house. So, for instance, I'm in this room now. So I've got two sets. Look at me, I'm doing it the wrong way. So I've got two sets of I've got two sets of picture frames here. One's called Memories, and I haven't put any pictures in there yet. Another one is just a set of picture frames, and you can see that there's a photo of me there in black and white, and I quite like that photo because I was the weight that I wanted to be. Here is a lovely fake plant that I bought from IKEA, and if you look here, you can also see some more plants here from IKEA. Here's a little calendar here. Walk around in your phone, describe what's in your house, and then listen back. That's a really, really great way to find your voice and
absolutely.
to learn how to ad-lib. That's a really, really great way of doing things.
I've been told that I've been told we have lots and lots of questions, Angie. So let's get Caroline back on so we can get through these questions. Yeah,
fascinating stuff, and you've got you've got a fair few fans here, Angie, who are asking questions, but also just want to say how much they're appreciating hearing from you as well. So I'm gonna go through the questions in kind of no particular order, so forgive me if they dart around a bit. But I'm going to start with Holly, and she wants to know, would you recommend getting experiences working behind the scenes at a station or a studio before becoming a radio presenter? I know that's the way you did it, but...
I would say that if you have an opportunity to go into a radio studio to do some work experience, even if it's just for 1 week, grab it with both hands and do all of the different things at that radio station. So spend the morning in a studio with a radio presenter, spend the afternoon in the marketing department, then the next day, spend the morning in the engineering department, see how promos are made, see how voiceovers are done, and then in the afternoon, go and actually sit with the engineers, see how things are done. Don't ever channel yourself. Don't have tunnel vision. It's such a wide and broad industry. You might decide you want to be a radio presenter, but then you might think, you know what? I quite enjoyed myself doing the script writing. I quite enjoyed sitting in the sales meeting and the director of Coca-Cola came in and said, listen, we want this advert. Okay, and watching how the advert is built and then scripting it and then, editing the script. Right, whose voice are we going to get on this? Shall we get a female voice? Shall we get a male voice? It's so broad. Don't ever say, right, I'm going to go in and just do this. Learn everything. It's such an exciting industry. Just get into a station and just decide, right, for the 5 days, if you're there for a week, 5 mornings, I'm going to do 5 different things. I'm going to go to 5 different departments. Have your lunch, and then in the afternoons, every day, I'm going to do 5 different things. So that when you come out of that radio station, you know about making promos, you know about recording, you know about engineering, you know about presenting, you know about script writing, you know about marketing, you know about sponsorship. Learn it all. Learn it all.
Good advice. I mean, you never know where opportunities are going to come from, do you? I mean, so another question about how do you keep your energy up when presenting and still sound natural and feel like yourself? Because obviously your shows are long.
I always say, and it took me a long time to get to this stage, I work effectively 3 hours a day. From the time I get into that studio, whatever's going on in my life is on hold. Because if someone's going to stop what they're doing to turn on the radio, whether they're in the car, the kitchen, the office, or if they're on the move, to turn on the app, to choose to listen to me, then whatever's going on in my life is on hold. Yeah? And my energy levels might be -10. The minute that first link goes out, my energy levels are 99.
Wendy says, our industries have crossed over through many media paths, and I admire your personal drive and determination. She, I think, is referring back to when you were talking about lockdown, and she says, would you agree that we are now in a restart position?
Definitely. Lockdown was scary. It was emotional. When I think about lockdown and I think about friends who were in a situation where COVID wasn't kind in their lives, I had to put a lot of my thoughts on hold. There were lots of people who, for them, lockdown was a completely new time. There were probably people who listened to radio because of lockdown, who had never listened to radio in that way before. So once again, had to up the energy level. And because of the time of day that I was on, 4 o'clock, I had to tell kids, okay, close the laptop now. Had to tell parents at 5 o'clock, okay, you close your laptop, family time. Had to say, right, 6 o'clock, let's start to wind down. And that in itself was a very challenging time, because there were times in lockdown that I was really, really sad. But if that had come across on the radio, then it would have been so easy for people to turn the radio off. It was a time of connecting. It was a time of renewing. And I always used to say on social media, because of lockdown, we got to new strength that we didn't know we had. We probably got to experience love that we never knew we had, and priorities had to change. And to utilize radio to do that was a blessing. It was a privilege as well. It really was. But it was a definite time of resetting. I'm not even sure that we will ever go back to the way things were before lockdown.
So you feel that you're doing it differently now, do you? Presenting to you, yeah.
Absolutely. Yes, I always say that there were songs in lockdown. I've been doing this a long, long time. Let's just take the song "You Might Need Somebody," whether that be by Randy Crawford or Shola Ama. I've been playing that song for years. In lockdown, that song sounded completely different. Completely different.
Hazel is asking, have you ever had moments in your show which have been very challenging? For example, technical difficulties, guests who didn't arrive or were difficult to interview. And can you advise on how to cope with those live on air? And also, she sort of says, linked to this, do you suggest presenting as if you are not phased, even if you are? Or is it okay to admit these days that it's a challenging day?
I'd say be yourself. So if I'm having a challenging day, I'm having a challenging day. And even though my daughters are 20 and 23, the mother in me still likes to make dinner for them before I leave for work. Sometimes I come home and find they've had takeaway. That's something to talk about on the radio. Do you know how long it took me to cook? And those girls of mine went out and bought a takeaway. It's fine to be honest. If you are in a situation where you're interviewing somebody who isn't being very forthcoming, and because I think a lot of interviews are now packaged, so they're pre-recorded, personally, I think you're quite within your rights to ask your interviewee if they're having a good day. Are you okay? Are you having a good day? You don't seem as though you're quite forthcoming. It doesn't feel as though you really want to do this. Would you like a cup of tea? Would you like a little bit of time? Maybe take some deep breaths, because I really, really have been looking forward to talking to you, and I just want to get the best from you. That normally makes them feel a lot better, and I won't tell you who I had to do that with.
What about technical difficulties on air, Angie? Because they happen.
Yes, they do. So when I was on Choice FM, so I'll give you two stories. When I was on Choice FM and we used vinyl, I can remember being on the phone and I queued up a song. I queued it up on 33. It was meant to be on 45. I was on the phone. Hello. you just have to suck it and see, and the phone lines are going. What are you doing? Whatever. You just have to say, do you know what? There was a problem with the turntable. And I've also had, and this happened to me quite recently because of COVID, because I was obviously initially working from home, and when I started to work back in the studio again, I can remember not plugging my headphones in the jack, but having my personal headphones on, but the studio headphones were still plugged in. And I opened the mic and I couldn't hear anything. And I just thought, you know what, Ange? You just got to get on with it. So I did the link and I closed the mic and off we went. And you just got to get on with it. You just got to get on with it. So, yeah.
A question, different subject, but do you think it matters in terms of finding work if you're based outside London?
I would have said years ago that to find a radio show, you used to have to go outside of London to perfect your craft, then make your way back into London. That used to be the old adage. Now, once again, I was blessed. I never had to do that. But I also think now, as the world is getting smaller because of the internet, I don't actually think that it is any different doing a show in Manchester or Scotland or Newcastle or Birmingham or, I just think radio is radio. And I say that now because Drive is national. So I know there is an audience in Scotland and the North East and the North West, the Lake District. But I just think if you find a radio slot and you are able to connect with the audience, geographics, I won't say geographics don't come into it, but there is something about being in London. And I say that as somebody who has broadcasted outside of London. So in 2002, when the Commonwealth Games were in Manchester, I worked in Manchester and it was great. And I felt that Manchester was listening to me, if that makes sense. But equally, because of the way that we now listen to radio, a lot of people listen to radio and don't have a radio. You can find that you've got audiences that are as far as Canada to Scotland to the Maldives. But, if you find that you can get yourself a little gig in London, and if that's where you want to be, then just go for it. You might want to be in Manchester. You might want to be in Birmingham. I think it's about your passion and where you want to be.
A slightly sad note here, or poignant maybe. How do you recall your 20s? I'm in that decade and I feel so lost. I'm a presenter, newsreader and producer with some experience at a community station.
How do I recall my 20s? Long time ago. How do I recall my 20s? Right, this might sound really weird, but I don't feel any different. I'm in my 50s now. 50 is the new 30. I don't think it's about age. I think it's about energy. So if I was to say, I'm not fighting age, I'm embracing age. And I'm embracing the fact that radio is such an energetic medium that I can talk to Stormzy, who I love, but equally, and I've interviewed Stormzy, but equally I've interviewed Elton John, who's in his 70s. I think it's an energy thing. If you feel that because you're in your 20s, you're not being taken seriously, I don't think that's for you to embrace what other people think about you because you're in your 20s. It's about putting your best foot forward. So you might find in your 20s that you're able to do something, read the news with a bit more passion and a bit more enthusiasm than someone, say, who's been reading the news for 40 years, who's currently in their 60s. I wouldn't put age on anything. If anything, I would utilise being around people who have been in the industry maybe a little longer than yourself. And because you are in your 20s, I would say get as much experience as you can from those people, but also don't be afraid to bring what you brought to the table. I found social media very, very challenging. But because of my daughters, who are 20 and 23, I'm now embracing that. So don't put age on it. Utilise and embrace those around you who, because they've been in the industry a bit longer, can teach you something. But don't forget that you can also bring something to the table as well. Don't let anybody look down on you because you're young. Don't ever do that.
What does the financial side of being a presenter look like? Would you have a decent enough salary for one show a week, or would one need to bolster their income with voiceover work?
When you first start in the industry, regardless at whatever level, you are going in at what I will call proving level. So, are you able to do this? Do you connect with an audience? And as you grow in the industry, you might find that advertisers like to advertise in your show, and then your worth kind of moves on, if that makes sense. So when I think about my show rate when I first started, and when I think about my show rate now, there's a difference. I think that I've probably been so blessed in my radio journey that I've had a salary that is livable, and I really give thanks for the fact that I do work 18 hours a week, and I do have a salary that is livable. And then when voiceovers do come up, because of the length of time that I've been in the industry, sometimes some voiceovers are much more favourable than others. Sometimes there's a flat rate of voiceovers because of the client, but obviously this voiceover that I've just done with Stanley's production company, God rest his soul, and with Arnold Schwarzenegger, that's got a completely different rate to the standard rate voiceover. So, and I wouldn't say it's about, adding to your salary with voiceover work, because you may not get voiceover work. And I don't say that negatively. I'm just being very realistic. If someone's voice at the moment is just whatever they do, whatever they say, however they say it, their voice is instantly recognisable, then they're going to get lots of voiceover work. So I would say, first and foremost, get yourself through the door. You might have to still do another little job on the side until you get to that stage where you are able to say, right, I'd like to take this further. I think that I bring a lot to the table. I would like to get my show rate up. Also, I will say, and I was saying this to the production crew here at Audio Train before we started, there is something, I think when you are poached from one station to go to another, that station wants you, so there will be an attraction in the show rate that you will be offered. Because if they want you, they want you. And they're not going to come for you and pay you less. They're going to come for you with a fairly attractive offer.
Okay, final question, and again, I apologise to those we haven't got to, but Afia would like to know, how do you get yourself heard by the people who make the decisions?
That can be quite a challenge, but I will say, if you know you're bringing something to the table, then you've just got to go for it. There's nothing more demoralising than wanting to bring something to the table, not quite knowing how to go about it, and then holding back. And finding that somebody who may not have as much passion, may not have as good an idea as yourself, but had the guts to walk through the door and say, listen, I'd like 10 minutes of your time. I'd like to talk about this. And they get through. Now, I will say this to anybody who has a passion for media, not just radio, but for media. If you've got an idea and you're already on the inside, then take that idea to a decision maker. They might be busy. Decision makers are very, very busy. Yeah. But I'd like 10 minutes of your time. Can I take you for a coffee? I've got an idea. You might not hear what you want to hear, but at least you've made a start. So the next time that you go to that person, number one, you've already had an introduction. Number two, they know that you've got ideas. Number three, they'll listen with a different ear because they know you've got passion. They know that you've got ideas. They know that you're not just what I would call, in my case, a show and go. You want to add some content to your show. You want your enthusiasm to come across. You love the brand that you're working for. You know the brand that you're working for. And there's ideas around the brand that you'd like to introduce. Now, as I say, you may not hear what you want to hear first time round, but I think it's much better for you to give those ideas so that at least those decision makers know this person loves this brand. This person knows what they're talking about. And you never know. They might then say, listen, in 6 months' time, got an idea. And because of what you said, because of what you asked, because of the idea you brought to me, I'd like you to take on this project. I'd like you to work with this person. I'd like you to develop something. So don't sit on it. If you're inside, go to the decision makers. Call the PAs, send the PA a message, send the PA an email. I'd like 10 minutes with. It can't harm. It can't harm.
Great advice. Thank you. It's a great way to end as well. Have the guts, seize the opportunities.
Absolutely.
Wanted to thank both of you. Thank you, Rosemary, and also Angie, very much for doing our session today. Angie Greaves from Smooth Radio and Rosemary Laryea from Times Radio. Our next session is a legal Q&A session. So if you've got any concerns and you want to know more about the business side of the business, there'll be questions and information about copyright, commissions, development, then do sign up for our session with Mint & Co. And following from that, we'll be hearing from award-winning podcasting duo, George the Poet and Ben Brick. So for details on all of these, go to the Audio Train website. Goodbye.